All right, everybody. Well, good morning and welcome to this special edition of Coffee and Conversation. I feel like we need like a fern or some sort of plant to complete the daytime talk show set that we have going on. But thank you all for being here. We are recording this so that we can post it to YouTube later for folks who aren't here to get a little bit more insight into our proposed budget for 2023. So what we want to talk about today, we're joined by our legendary, illustrious, I don't know what descriptor to use, beloved, I hope. Yes, Parish Treasurer David Todd, who's going to walk us through parts of the budget for 2023, the proposed budget, and also to tell us a little bit about where things are right now, you know, where we plan on ending the year and what we're looking at in the year ahead. That's kind of the overview for today. And then also to give you all a chance to ask any questions you might have, both about the numbers that are reflected in the budget, but also just about kind of some behind-the-scenes things. What are behind the numbers? What are our goals? What are some things we're planning in 2023? We'd love to talk to you all about that too. So that is the hope for today, and to do so with some delicious treats and caffeine. So without further ado, let's almost begin. I will say, before we launch into all of this, this is our stewardship logo and theme for this year, which I am mentioning in my sermon this morning for those of you who are at the 8 o'clock. For those of you who are at the 10:30, please still come, even though I just told you that we'll be talking about stewardship. But our theme for this year is thanks and praise. It comes from the Eucharistic prayer and is really the focus of this year's, not just our financial stewardship, but also, I think, the focus of all of the ways that we steward the resources God gives us, right? We are meant to be stewards not just of our treasure, but also our time and talent, as the church says, and the ways that we give of what we have back to God. And so this year, it's really a reminder that all of that, all of the ways that we steward what we have are a part of our spiritual worship. They're a part of how we show our gratitude to God and enact the ministry of the church as a community. It also stands as well that this year we have a lot to give thanks and praise for. So this theme really works on a number of levels. It's not just about giving as our spiritual worship, but also just being grateful for the faithfulness that all of you have demonstrated through what's been a weird and challenging time. So with that, David, kick us off. Where are we now as we step into this year?
So before Cameron puts some numbers up on the screen for us.
Oop, is your mic? There we go.
I think in the world of COVID, I've done so many video meetings, I forget about microphones and things like that, so apologize for that. So before we start, I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about like what our budget means to us. You know, you think about your household budget, and you can organize it any way you want to do it. But at the end of the day, really what matters is what's the bottom line. How much you have coming in and how much you have going out, and where you put it is it kind of tells a story about what's important to you. You might have bought a house because you're starting a family, so you have a mortgage. That's important to you to have a place for your family. You like to travel, so you have a big budget for traveling. So it's the same thing for any organization or any company or any family or individual, is that your budget is your story. It's what's important to you. It's where you put emphasis on your resources. And that for us is kind of like, that's the way that I approach this, is that what's important to us in St. Richard's. Where's God calling us to go? What's important for us to be doing out in the community? What's important for us to be as we're discipling ourselves? And so our budget tells our story, what's important to us and whatnot. And you can organize a budget any way you want to. A lot of times people focus to, this is how much revenue we have coming in, this is how much expenses we have to go out, and true to psychology is that when things happen, the first thing to go is we got to cut everything. And, we did that for a lot of years, the last couple of years with COVID. We really cut things back. Some of it was pretty obvious as we didn't have services and things like that. But now it's time to start thinking about the future. We've had a lot of things and we've kept a lot of things. We're back into live services. We're still continuing the live streaming. And, we we would look at our budget through COVID, on a month-to-month, sometimes week-to-week basis, and really prioritizing where things should go. And the emphasis was connections and making sure that we knew what was going on with our members and what was going on in the community. And now it's time to start going back and kind of, I don't think that we're ever going to go back to what pre-COVID looks like. I don't even remember what that looks like. But we have this new world that we're living in, and we have to think about that and how St. Richard's is going to go forward. So that's kind of the framework of this, is that I view this financial stewardship as a ministry. And for me, it's really exciting that I get to see all the stuff that goes on at St. Richard's. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but we have over 50 ministries at St. Richard's. It's incredible. And getting to see all the stuff that people do and get to see all the stuff that people are passionate about, and then being able to help provide resources to do that is fantastic for me. It really gives me a lot of joy. And it's amazing to see how much time and effort people put in behind the scenes for things. I can't begin to tell you how many people do so much work around here. The other thing that's amazing about our church too is that we can take $1 and we can turn it into 100 sometimes, just with the amount of volunteer work and the efforts that people take to make things work and make things happen. So if you don't mind bringing it up, We'll talk a little bit. I'm going to talk first kind of about where we are year to date for 2022 and how we see the year ending, and then we'll talk about the 2023 budget a little bit.
And let me know where you want me to scroll.
You're right here. You're perfect.
That's good? Okay.
So there's two charts up on top here. One is for revenue, the one on the left-hand side, and then the other one on the right-hand side is for expenses. And so you can see, in the bar chart that there's a lot of different things that we look at, and you can see in 2019 that, like, pre-COVID, we were actually, in the years prior, our revenue was trending up from, like, giving, from other things. The parish hall rental was starting to, revenue from the parish hall rental was starting to pick up. 2020, you can kind of see it went way down, and we all know the reason why for that. In 2021, it picked up, and then for 2022, we're actually back to the level of where we were pre-COVID. So that's a really good sign. And we're looking at right now, year to date, we have $535,000 in revenue total, and that kind of comes in, most of it comes from pledge giving, people that fill out pledge cards and then give on a monthly basis or quarterly basis or annual basis. And then we have Sunday services, and that's the money as the plate goes around and people put, some cash into it or maybe a check. And then we have the capital campaign that's been ongoing for a couple of years, that we've got $87,000 for it. And we'll talk a little bit more about the capital campaign and our parish hall debt here in just a minute. But things are looking really good for us this year as far as where we have been for the last couple of years, and it's making our life a lot easier, where we're not always having to say, I never ever try to say no to any kind of thing that we want to do in the church, but sometimes I have to say, can you wait a minute on it? But it's getting easier to manage our expenses and our revenues because things are starting to kind of get back to normal. Now on expenses, this is kind of a high-level breakout of where our dollars go in categories. The biggest one is mission and ministry. And, that includes, like in our budget, it's kind of set up to tell our story because we kind of have three themes in our budget of community, discipleship, and worship. And within those umbrellas, there's things like youth ministry, the music program, Sunday services, community outreach, all kinds of different things that we have going on. And then property and building is, how we take care of the facilities around here. And, during COVID, we deferred a lot of maintenance and replacement that we needed to do on the building because we just had to make priorities on things. And so we're in the process now of getting stuff, fixing things that we had postponed, and we're doing it kind of on a very intentional basis of, we have a list of things, and we're just kind of working through that list as we have money come available. The one thing that's really exciting is that some of y'all may have been here when the air conditioner in the narthex was out, and those two units are rather large and rather expensive, and they've been here since that thing was built in 1996. And we were always just we were hoping that it would last until we got to the point where someday we're going to expand the narthex, where the nave, the entryway there, the glass partition is going to be knocked out, and we're going to expand that And so there won't be like a little entryway. And then we're going to build a new entryway that connects the parish hall to the church area. And that's kind of down the road a ways. We're not going to be doing any of that until we finish however it works out, our parish hall debt. But that's kind of a little sign to come. But the good news is that we had, the air conditioners were going to be about $77,000 to replace them. And we had $23,000 in what we call a major building renovation fund that we've just set money aside over the years. And then we have some grant money that we got from the diocese that they've been helping out us a little bit through COVID times. And unfortunately, we didn't need all that money, so we just saved it. Well, it turns out now we need it. And so then you guys may remember that there was an email that went out, talking about this situation and asking people to contribute to it. And I want to say within like maybe a week and a half, we raised $28,000. And so that's been taken care of. And the air conditioners are on order. And I think that based on what I last heard from Jeff, our junior warden, is that we're going to be looking at kind of November, maybe early December timeframe to have those things put in. And it's only going to take a week to have them put in. So between services, we're going to be done. And I also found out that we're going to save some money because originally we're going to have to, if you've ever looked out there behind there, there's kind of these concrete walls that hide all the air conditioning equipment. We thought we were going to have to knock those down and rebuild them, but we don't have to. So we're saving a little bit of money with that. But anyway, so it's exciting stuff that we're getting a new AC unit. And, if you were here, you felt it when it wasn't working. And
felt it this morning, David.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little stuffy in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe it knows its days are numbered.
That's right. Yeah. Just needs to hold out a little longer.
But anyway, the property and building is the stuff that we do around here. It includes our utilities and, what we do to fix things around here, landscaping, all that good stuff. And administration is, that's exactly what it sounds like. It's all the expenses we have that support mission and ministry and all the things that we do. It's just kind of that underlying layer. And that includes like Jen, who does a fantastic job as the director of operations, and Liza and Ron, our bookkeeper, and then, buying paper and, pens and all that good stuff. The one thing that we've had that, I'm sure you felt this in your own pocketbook is, there's been a lot of inflation over the last year and a half. And, we've been a victim of that too. And so we've really been careful. And, we thought we were coming out of COVID and we were going to be doing a lot better. And then all this inflation hit us. And so we've been having to continue to kind of really watch the expenses as they come in. And, we have very active conversations about what's going on and where we're going to prioritize resources, and we talk on a weekly basis sometimes about those. And so that's kind of what our budget looks like. And so year to date, we have expenses of $518,000, and we have a budget surplus of $17,000 this year, so far year to date. Now, if you'll scroll up just a little bit to there, stop right there. Okay, the second graph on the left-hand side that says 2022 revenues to expenses is kind of just a very, all the revenues rolled up and all the expenses rolled up and kind of a comparison of those. The year-to-date, we have a $17,000 surplus. Year-to-date for our budget, year-to-date budget, we should have a $10,000 surplus. And then our annual budget was actually and this annual budget is only for operating. This does not include like capital campaign and the parish hall debt. Our budget was planned to be a $35,000 deficit. And I'll explain why we have deficits in our budget in just a second. But our year-end forecast is that we're basically going to end flat at negative $2,000. And so just to tell you guys that we do budgeting very conservatively. We look at a lot of information on like historical giving, historical revenue. We look at economic conditions, and then we do a statistical forecast for our revenue for like pledge giving and for Sunday services and for other types of revenue that we have coming in. And that ties into how we do you'll see a figure here in a minute. That ties into how much we're going to ask for, what we think we need in pledge giving for the next year, and then the amount that we're asking for. So I'm really happy that we are conservative in our forecast, and we are very careful with our budget. And the last couple of years, we have basically ended very well when we've intentionally had to run deficits because there's certain things that, you can't cut. We can't stop doing Sunday services. We can't turn off the lights. And then we also have to start, eventually like 2021, we were sitting around talking and we're like, someday this thing's going to end and we have to start being ready for the future. And so we had to start planning for when we're gathered here today for and so our budgets, sometimes when you see a deficit, it's because we are making a decision to make an investment in things. And so when you see like the budget for 2022 and we have a $35,000 deficit planned, first off, we have a reserve of $100,000 in cash that just sits in our bank for emergencies. So it's not like we're going to be in the hole cash-wise for this. We're going to have to come to y'all and say, hey, can you loan us some money? But we have a separate reserve fund that we have in place just for these, and then we kind of step out in faith because there's things that we have to do. We have to be ready. We have to plan for the future. We have to handle current needs, and so sometimes we got to step out in faith a little bit because it just the revenue just doesn't seem to be there. But at some point, if we cut the budget too much, you've heard the expression that we stop cutting muscle and we start cutting into bone, and eventually you're going to lose an arm. And so there's only so much you can do if you want your church to thrive and be successful. And so that's kind of the philosophy that we have on how sometimes we do have a budget deficit, but we have set up our church in such a way over the years that during the good times we put money away so that in bad times we have extra just in case we need it. And we also have, and I've set this up back in 2013 and we have never touched it, but we also at our bank we have a $100,000 line of credit that we can tap into in case of a dire emergency. So we have lots of different layers of defense, if you will, to help us financially. But so far, as we work through things, we never have had to use any of those. And I'm really happy for that and grateful for that. So let's talk about the parish hall debt. Do you guys remember, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but back in 2018, we launched the second capital campaign for the parish hall. And the idea was that we were going to pay off the debt, and then there was kind of a mixed message that came out with that capital campaign, kind of the marketing for it, that was a little confusing, that we didn't really communicate that the first priority above everything was to pay off the debt, and then there were some other things that were presented, and they kind of were overlaid with each other, and so the campaign was a little confusing about what the purpose of it was. And I just want to, anytime I get a chance, just tell everybody that this capital campaign that we've had ongoing since 2018, that ends in 2023, the only purpose of it is to pay off the debt. That's it. If we happen to have money left over at the end of it, then we'll have a discussion about what we do with that money, but that's the only thing that we're concerned about with any money that comes in that's dedicated to the parish hall. And so we took on, just to give you a little bit of background, we finished construction in 2017, and this whole parish hall with construction, design, and all the costs, what we call soft costs and construction, just the extra stuff, permits and all that good stuff. This project actually, constructing this was like $4.3 million. And we paid for a third of it with the cash that we had on hand, and then we financed the other 2/3. And so we took out a $2.7 million loan with our bank, and we took out a 20-year mortgage with a 4% interest rate, and for a commercial rate, that's outstanding. During that time period, you could get a home rate for less than that, but they don't do that to commercial lending. So our bank is actually at First Texas Bank, and they're local here to Central Texas and Austin, and they've got branches in Round Rock and all the surrounding little towns, and where I live in Georgetown, they have one, and they are very, very community-oriented and have always been supportive of us. And I'll tell you something outstanding that they did for us in just a minute. But when we took out that loan of $2.7 million, the Episcopal Church also has an associated foundation called the Crump Foundation that's managed by J.P. Morgan. And a very wealthy man a long time ago, when he passed away, he bequeathed to this foundation a lot of money. And what they do with it is they give out $500,000 block grants or loans to people for churches who want to have to build something. And the terms of it are 2% for 20 years. Now, you can't beat that. And so the way it works is we make an annual payment to them, a $25,000 payment plus interest, accrued interest, and we do that once a year. And with our First Texas Bank loan, previously we had been paying a little over $16,000 a month on the loan. So, and we were cruising along very well. We were actually our plan was to have it paid off by 2023, all of it, and we were on a very good pace to do that until COVID hit. And that really kind of slowed things down. And so we talked with the Crump Foundation, we talked with our bank, and some fortunate things happened. One is that one thing that was very fortunate is because we'd already paid off a lot of our debt, they were very willing to work with us because we had a very good relationship with them. And so Crump allowed us to split the annual payment into 2 payments, in the middle of the year and the end of the year, and that kind of helped us manage our cash flow. And our First Texas Bank is that part of the term of the 20-year loan is that there would be an interest rate adjustment every 5 years. This is not like an adjustable rate mortgage like you might hear with a home. We still have a 20-year note. It's just that every 5 years they adjust the rate depending on what the rate is published in the Wall Street Journal, the prime rate that they have. So what was fortunate is that our time frame for that 5-year adjustment came up. And so what they said that when I was talking to them, just telling them that, we're suffering like everybody, and is there something we can do to kind of work on how we pay for this thing over time? And, the options were refinancing it, options were, slowing down the payments, but that would make the term, make our payout go longer. But then they made the offer of when we renewed our rate that they would re-amortize the loan. And since we had already paid off so much of our loan, we had gone from $2.7 million down to, I think at the time it was like $1.4 million. They re-amortized that, and I cut our payment from $16,000 a month down to $8,000 a month. So very, very helpful. And it has helped us out tremendously. So that's the kind of we've been banking with them for like 45, 50 years since we first became St. Richard's, and so they are a really good partner for us. So where we stand with the loan is that we've got 57% of the loan paid off. If you think about it in terms of both of these loans are 20-year notes. In the first 5 years, we've paid off 57% of the debt, over half. And our goal is still to have, the ideal goal would be to still have it paid off at the end of the capital campaign in 2023. But the other bookend of that is to pay it off to term. And obviously, with all of us having, thinking about with inflation and worrying about the economy and things like that we all have decisions to make about how we spend our money. And so we don't think it's realistic that we're going to pay it off in 2023 like we originally planned. It probably is ideally will be a couple of years after that, and we're still working on a plan for that right now. We're kind of still kind of waiting to see how the economy lands and how things are going to look toward the end of the year so we can start working on a plan for that. But at the same time, we don't want to go all the way out, because if we do that, we're going to end up paying a lot more in interest, and that's money that we could use for other things. I think we'll end up paying like another $150,000 to $160,000 in interest, and that can go a long way in helping out the community, helping us, and doing different things. And so the quicker that we pay off this deal, we can use that savings into other things. So we want to try and have it paid off sooner rather than later. But if things do continue to be weird in the world like they are, then we have the backstop of is that we have some very low payments that we have to make for the next 17 years. So that's the one thing. And so now we owe on the Crump Foundation loan $273,000, and we owe a little over $1 million out of the $2.7 million that we originally started with 5 years ago. So it's not an ideal situation, but we are just fine. We're not, the ideal situation, we'll be paying it off at the end of next year like we planned on. But we're doing just fine with it, and things continue to get better.
Bless you.
All right, can you scroll up just a little bit?
Yeah. Well, and I'll also say, just to add something to that about the plan, is that in a way that plan is already starting to take shape. What we want to do is really make this account for this both metaphorically and literally, account for it in a new strategic plan for the parish, 5-10-year plan and really think about not just addressing the debt on this building, but think about that holistically in terms of all of the goals that we have across all of our ministries. And so that work is already starting and has already begun with some of our ministries doing some feasibility studies about their growth, looking at demographic changes in our area, stuff like that. And so one of our goals for 2023 is to actually put that plan together and get that out to all of you. So that is sort of in process a little bit already. So, all right.
No, so that's this whole, so we have like things that are like facility rated, like when you have like a large one-time expense, that doesn't go into the operating budget, that goes into like a capital expense because that will really skew your numbers when you're looking at it. And so the way our policy works out is that any kind of repair or purchase, like if we need to buy a new computer, for example, for a staff member, is anything over $1,000 is like a capital expense, and so it's not recognized like in the operating budget because we use the historical data to forecast our revenues and our expenses. And so if you have like all these spikes all these times with these expenses, it's really hard to forecast because you don't have expenses like that often. So like, remember I told you we have a major building renovation fund? That's separate from what we do with operations. And so we have all these different buckets that we track our expenses with so that we can keep everything like operating expenses, so we have apples to apples to look at, and so those really big expenses like replacing the air conditioner is not part of that. It's a separate fund altogether. $17,000 right now. Okay, so on this graph right here, these are different scenarios. So like the one that you see here is for 2019. That's how much revenue we had come in of $719,000. If you look right here where it says 2022. Right. Right. So the actual year to date is $535,000 in revenue of how much money we've had come in so far. We've had $518,000 of expenses so far year to date, so that leaves us a surplus of $17,000. Does that work?
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out if there's a $80,000 or something between our annual budget of $684K.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So that's where this number comes in right here, is you can see that remember I talked about the intentional deficit that we had? So if you look at the annual budget right here on this graph on the far right-hand side, you can see that we forecast $649,000 of revenue, but then when we had all our conversations and we forecast our expenses, it was $684,000. And so there was a planned deficit of $35,000. The reality through the year so far has been different from that. But we knew that the $35,000 deficit was intentional because we have to think about the stuff that we have to do now, and then we also have to think about the future. And so if we try to cut a lot of stuff, we're going to hurt our mission and ministry. There's only so much we can do. And so the reason why we're comfortable running a deficit is because I talked about those different, like we have a reserve fund of $100,000 that's just sitting in a separate bucket that we need in case of an emergency. So we have enough money to cover that deficit if we had to. But as you can see, like, the year-end forecast, we're going to be almost at zero, like a flat revenue to expenses. And that's actually where a nonprofit wants to be, is you want to be at zero at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I'll also say, sort of reflected, the story behind these numbers is actually something I allude to in my sermon, which is that y'all showed up in a big way this year. We were a little anxious headed into the year because, again, we are trying to sort of thread this needle between making prudent financial decisions, which we want to do, but also not wanting decisions around our finances to hamper our ministries, right? Like we don't want to actually, lop a knee off or something if we don't have to. And so there were also a number of things over the course of this year that increased in cost substantially that we didn't really know to budget for because we didn't know they were going to increase. A big one being our cleaning costs more than doubled, utility costs and stuff like that all went up. But again, y'all were immensely faithful and showed up in a big way, and revenue actually went up as well as costs. And so the real blessing of this year is that we would have been in quite the hole actually by now, but we're not. And so thank you.
Yeah.
Is kind of the story behind these numbers as well. I mean, We were having a little bit of heartburn headed into the summer once we did realize that certain fixed costs were going to go up more substantially than we had anticipated. But then again, very faithfully, money came in, and we haven't had to have hard conversations about things. We've not had to worry about where stuff's going to come from too much because, again, y'all just gave generously, and we exceeded our projections, which ended up being just such a blessing because our costs went up in ways we didn't expect either. Yeah. So that's a little bit of the story behind that discrepancy as well. So.
Are mission and ministry fixed or variable? They are both. So one of the ways that we look at the budget and as we're doing the budget forecast is one of the ways we look at it is fixed cost and variable cost. And so, like fixed cost would be like salaries for, youth ministry or family minister, clergy. Some other fixed costs would be like wine and wafers for Sunday worship. And so there are, and then and I don't really call them variable, I call them flexible because you have to spend a certain amount. You just have a choice of how much you spend on certain, like youth ministry or family ministry or, any of the other things that we do is that we have to spend a certain minimum amount on those because we have to have Sunday school, we have to have youth program. So there's a certain minimum we have to spend, but we have some flexibility on how much that is. And that's what we did during COVID is we were really looking at how we spend those dollars. Like there's a certain minimum we have to spend, and then the rest of it we had to really allocate where we scaled up dollars and where we scaled down dollars. Yes?
So you mentioned $100,000. I'm curious about that fund. How is it invested? And, I'm thinking about our own finances. We all know what the economy's done. So ours, finances have taken quite a beating. And I'm wondering if that $100,000 used to be $200,000 and now it's beat down to $100,000 or,
Yeah, good question.
It's a very good question. So that is actually just like, if you've ever heard like Dave Ramsey or any good financial advisor, is you should have like 3 to 6 months worth of expenses in your, base expenses in reserve, right? And you don't invest that money because you need to have all of it whole. And so you put it into a savings account where right now you don't really make anything. Hopefully someday that will change. But you don't want to put that at risk of investment because you don't want to lose that because you might need it someday. So we have the same philosophy. It's sitting in a separate account at the bank and collecting 0.1% interest or whatever it is. And I might as well use that as a segue because, is there any other questions about 2022 before I switch over? Because I want to talk about some exciting things for 2023 and the 2023 budget. One thing that's exciting that has happened, and it's always been...
Where do you want me to go?
No, nowhere yet.
Okay, all right. Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure I was... Okay.
Okay. So one of the by the way, this stuff that we're showing you is going to be sent out to y'all, so you can look at it. And if you have more questions, you can out to me through the church office, and we'll answer your questions. But we have set up, for 2023, we're setting up endowments for the first time ever in our church. And we are setting up like a general operating endowment. And then we also are setting up an endowment for camp scholarships. St. Richard's has always helped sponsor our kids who want to go to camp and need some help. The way it's set up is that St. Richard's pays a third, the diocese will pay a third, and then the camper's family will pay the other third. But in the past, we've covered up to 2/3 based on the individual person's need. Well, now we actually have an endowment that someone has very generously donated like $25,000 toward that will, as we grow the money, that the goal is that through perpetuity we'll be able to fund up to 15 campers' entire scholarship, or more if we only have to give a third or a half or something like that. So and then we have the general operating endowment. And so this is something that's always been important to me and the finance committee for us to work on, and now we finally have it done. And the really good part is that our diocese, I don't know if you guys know this or not, has a lot of resources. I'll give you an example that I was on the executive board of the diocese from 2013 to 2017. And one of the first things we did is, and this decision's kind of funny in hindsight, but the diocese owned St. Luke's Hospital System in Houston. And one of the first things that they were doing when I came onto the executive board was they were studying whether they should continue to own and operate this thing or not, because it's not really the diocese's expertise. And so they were studying, selling it to another organization that does specialize in healthcare. And so what ended up happening was that the St. Luke's was sold to CHA, which is Catholic Hospital. Anyway, it's a big Catholic, and they have like $40 billion in assets of hospitals, and so they were much better equipped, and so we sold it to them for $1 billion. If you guys have ever heard of the Episcopal Foundation that was created out of that $1 billion proceeds, that is an example of like one of the resources that the diocese has. The Episcopal Foundation gives money out for grants for churches to set up health clinics. They fund a lot of health research and different things like that. And so that's what the diocese does. And then we also have different foundations like the Bishop Quinn Foundation, all kinds of things. They give out grants for mission and ministry. We got a $50,000 grant back in 2016, 2017. And then if you guys remember, that's what we used to do Theology Live with, where we went out into the bars and had conversations, and it was very, very successful. So our diocese is fortunate that it has all these resources that we can do a lot of good things with. And so they're going to be the ones that manage our investments for us because they are a relative big boy in the investment world. They have access to a lot of funds that the average investor that we wouldn't have access to. So we're getting a lot of elite financial advice, a lot of access to very, very high performing assets. And so those endowments are going to be very well taken care of. And we also are going to be setting up a board of trustees to help manage and oversee those. And so there'll be more coming about that, but that's one thing that we're really excited about, is that we're going to start having some revenue coming in that is going to be not dependent on economic conditions so much and different things, individual things. So it's one thing that's really, really exciting. And I'm also just especially excited about having a camp scholarship fund that we can give away all this money to campers to help them get to Camp Allen. All right, so let's talk about 2023. Oh, sure.
James got a question, yeah.
You're saying the endowments are being managed by the diocese?
Where the money goes will be managed by us, but they're just going to manage the investment decisions.
Yeah, so, the diocesan funds are actually managed by Hall Capital, which is based in San Francisco. So it's not like a group of people in the diocesan offices managing the money, right?
Right.
So when we say it's managed by the diocese, what we really mean is that it's managed alongside the diocesan investments by Hall Capital. But as David said, we direct where it goes. We can stipulate how much we want to draw on it. All that sort of stuff is up to us. It just allows us access to financial vehicles we wouldn't have otherwise at our investment level, and takes away some of the heavy lifting of having to be so hands-on managing it ourselves, which is helpful, right? Because that's actually requires kind of a lot of time and resources from folks. So it's a really great blessing to have that as an opportunity in the Diocese of Texas, because that is not something that exists in other dioceses, to be able to do something like that. So,
Yeah.
oops, there we go.
And the Hall Capital it's a firm. It's not a big firm like, it is a large firm, but it's not like, Fidelity or TD Ameritrade or things like that. They focus on large investors managing their investments, and so their advice is a little different than what you get when you go to talk to your financial advisor. So, but we're very comfortable. I watched when I was on the executive board of the diocese for 5 years. I was the governance chair, and kind of helped develop policy and how we manage things. I'm very comfortable seeing how they made investment decisions and how they reported to the diocese, that they're very transparent and that they do a very good job in delivering good returns. They're very active in moving money around as needed as economic conditions change and things like that. And I've even seen them where they've actually, when we started having some economic turmoil, that they actually pulled everything out and just sat on the cash until things got better and put it back in. So they're very active, and they have a kind of protect principle first philosophy, as opposed to being very, very risky. Because just like us, we want to maintain want to keep our principle intact to the degree possible, but still at the same time get some return on it.
Yeah. Well, and there are a number of diocesan ministries, and we need to move on to 2023 because we only have about 10 minutes left. But
Okay.
there are a number of diocesan ministries that depend on the funds that are there. So they do take good care of it. I'm on the board of the Bishop Quinn Foundation presently, which oversees curacies, clergy health insurance, and strategic mission grants. And our last board meeting, we talked about, as the markets change, are we worried about things? And actually, at the last meeting with Hall Capital, like we don't have as much anxiety as maybe we would if things were just in high-risk situations. So anyway, all right, what do you need me to put up there, David?
Go to the next page, please. Just the top two graph, or just where we can see the first stop right there.
Okay.
Okay.
I wonder what happens if I do this.
There
Oh,
you
that
go.
gets too small.
You
Maybe.
can zoom in on it.
I
though.
zoom in. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do this guy. Can y'all see that at all?
Would it be better to have it the other way like it was?
Other way? Okay, all right.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. So the budget, we can go through this a little faster now because it's set up the same way as like the 2022 actual revenues and expenses. We're forecasting a revenue of $826,000. And the way that we do our revenue is that we look at, we have a lot of history with the, pledge giving, Sunday services, and all the other different revenue. And we do a lot of different scenarios that we do, like a pessimistic scenario, we do a likely scenario, we do an optimistic scenario, and then we blend those together with a kind of, simply put, it's a weighted average of those three different scenarios. And so this takes into account the fact that things might be a little worse than we think, might be a little bit better, and it kind of puts everything in the middle. And so we're looking at $826,000 of revenue for next year, and then we're looking at $876,000 of expenses. And again, this is going back to the same philosophy that we talked about, that we asked, for the first time in a couple of years, we asked the staff to actually come back and say, this is kind of like your Christmas budget. What do you need to do your ministry in 2023? And the interesting thing is that the budget that came back to us was over $1 million. So we had to kind of scratch our heads a little bit and look at that and go, okay. But it was actually a really good exercise because it helped us know what we need to look at and kind of, this is really like a better, $1 million for a church our size is not an uncommon budget. So that's something that we have to strive through. But we still had to, we look at the revenue of 826 and $1 million request. We have to make some priorities in that. And so we've met several times, and Finance Committee has met several times. And over the past couple of months, we've kind of whittled it down and made priorities. And we got the budget down to, the expenses down from a little over $1 million down to $876,000. And so what that does is that puts us at a deficit of $50,000. And that's only 5% of our revenue. So if you think about it in terms of the big picture, the $50,000 does sound like a lot of money, but when you compare it to the revenue that's going to be coming in, it's 5%. And so I feel comfortable personally if we have like a plus or minus of 5%, that we're okay operating in that world, because that's essentially when you look at finance and capital budget, and look at accounting and budgeting, that a 5% margin of error is within reason. That's like if you go to Exxon and they have their revenue is off by 5%, the CPA is not going to be too upset with that. So with our expenses there, you can kind of see that they are very, if you scroll, yeah, you can see our expenses are very proportional to what they were before. That most of our money goes to mission and ministry. We have administration expenses and property and building, and our parish hall debt. So, and I've already talked about that. We used to have to pay that reamortization of the loan happened in June of this year. So in years prior, our debt service payment, or our payments were $236,000, and because we were able to kind of work things out with our bank and with the Crump Foundation, we were able to cut that in over half, a little over half. So that really, we went from paying $236,000 a year. In 2023, we're going to be paying $120,000. That's one way that we were really able to help our budget out. And the other thing I want to point out too is that there's outreach of $42,000, and that's just what's in our budget That doesn't include the $60,000 that we're going to give away for the pumpkin patch. So the church spends a little over $5,000 on the pumpkin patch, and we give away $60,000. So think about that. That's where I remember earlier I was talking about how we take dollars and we multiply them and stretch them out. So that is that. Now, the reason you guys are going to see at the bottom here, this is going to go out in the pledge materials, that for the suggested pledge, total amount is $623,000. And if you'll scroll up just a little bit, back up to the revenue.
Yeah. Does that look
Yeah,
right?
you see general pledge has a budget, has our forecast is $549,000. So the reason why we ask for more money in the pledge, just to be transparent, is that historically we only get about 86% of what people pledge. And it happens because people move away, people move on to heaven, things change in people's lives, they have to change their pledge. Just all kinds of, there's all kinds of reasons why we never collect everything that people pledge, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we always try to ask for a little, we put out there that this is what we need so that we can actually get to the amount that we actually need, if that makes sense. So the $623,000 takes into account the kind of attrition that we have, year over year from not being able to, that we don't fully realize what's actually been pledged. So just, if you see that and you're like, I wonder why that is, that's the reason why, is just to account for the attrition that we have every year. And so, is there any questions about the 2023 budget? And a couple of other things is that one thing that will also really help out is that the diocese is getting ready to start the grant application cycle, and so we're going to be applying for some grants too. And that will really help us out, because if we can get just imagine if we get a $50,000 grant, that will help relieve a lot of pressure, and then we can potentially do some other things that we had to put on hold in the budget request that we had to kind of put at a lower priority.
And then you don't have to pay back the grant, is that correct?
No, that's correct.
That's correct, yeah.
Just a question about utilities and property building.
Uh-huh.
Are we, taking full advantage of, most utilities have programs and means to cut down the energy bill,
Yeah.
and upgrade the lights, and upgrade the HVAC, and all of that?
Mm-hmm. So I believe that there is a rebate with our new AC units coming in. And then, the manufacturer is giving us a rebate that's reflected in the price. And then utilities, the way that we manage that is that every year we typically will shop around, and then we'll sign a 1-year contract with someone, and then we reevaluate on a yearly basis what they are. And so, unfortunately, right now, just because you've all seen your utilities go up, is that they're going to be more expensive no matter how we negotiate. But we've built that into we increased utility expenses by. But one thing to others that I'm really excited about this is that even though we really had to look at this budget because we had $1 million worth of requests, and we kind of had to prioritize, but in some areas we were able to do, like, for example, like youth ministry, family ministry, and music, which are kind of like the 3 really big things that we have, right? We were able to double their budgets from like 2020 and 2021. So that's one thing that's really exciting, is that we've been able to, because we're kind of getting back to pre-COVID levels, we're actually able to really expand the dollars that people are going to be able to use. They're not getting everything that they want, but they're getting definitely a lot more than what they've had in the last couple of years.
Yeah, this really is, this past year has been a year of trying to steady things again, right? Bringing things back on board and getting things, again, I don't know what to call the era we're in, because it's not really post-COVID, right? It's just sort of different COVID. But activity level certainly has changed a lot. And so we've really relied on our ministries in particular, and they've done all a really fabulous job of this, to be very, very tight managing their expenses. To, again, maybe not forego some things entirely, but to push them out, and to rely on money that had already previously been set aside for those ministries. And so part of what this budget reflects as well is that we are trying to put money back into those ministries again, so that they're not relying on money they've fundraised or saved or that's been set aside in a designated account, but that we're actually really investing in. The other thing that this budget reflects too is there's some things built in that were kind of pre-COVID things that the vestry mandated we bring back, a big one being having a constable on campus on Sundays, both for security purposes, but also for, traffic help or whatever as for big events. And the cost of that's actually pretty substantial. Depending on how many special events we would ask this person to do, anywhere from $22,000 to $25,000 for a year, which is a pretty substantial addition into your budget. And so there are some things like that that also are reflected here in these higher amounts, as well as just, like I said, a lot of our fixed costs going up this past year that we didn't really foresee. But we're very grateful that we were able to cover.
Are there any new ministries?
Pardon me?
Are there any new ministries? Or it's just
So like I told you, we have 50 ministries, and so we don't have we do what's called fund accounting, where we have our operating fund, we have a building fund, and then we have approximately 30 different smaller funds, which are called restricted accounts. That, for example, like youth ministry and family ministry, we have a monthly amount that we put into the accounts for those ministry leaders to use, and they also have fundraised over time, and so. Those are those are kind of the big buckets that we have set aside for ministry. And then individual ones that are smaller, we have Daughters of the King Brotherhood. We have funds for all the bigger ones. And then, some of the things that are more I don't want to say that they are ongoing, but, like the pumpkin patch, for example, or smaller things that we do that happen once or twice a year. Those don't have their individual funds, but they do have, we do have a special account for those. And so that's how we track them. And so as far as new ministries. I don't think that there is a new ministry, a new dedicated ministry, but I'll say youth ministry and family ministry have a lot of new plans for things.
Yeah, I was going to say, there maybe not new ministries, but certainly some new initiatives.
Yes.
And a big thing that I'm really excited to announce on All Saints Sunday as well, just as a little teaser. There's a big announcement coming on All Saints Sunday about something for next year as well that I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, hopefully we're a growing parish. We know many parishes are not growing.
Yeah, that's true.
Unfortunately. So what growth assumptions are built into our budget in terms of how many families, whatever that we're attracting and growing across 2023 and beyond?
Yeah. So from a revenue, from a financial perspective, we look back, I've got 40 years of history, and we obviously don't look back that far. But I do kind of a long-term forecast of 10 years, and then I do a 5-year forecast, and a 3-year forecast, and a 2-year forecast. And so that kind of takes into account long-term growth, and it also takes into account short-term variance and things like that. And that all gets blended together into one estimate, for each of the different areas. And so when we look at, kind of how things go over time is that, you kind of have this long-term trend like you were talking about. And then we kind of have COVID, we suffered short-term shrinkage. And now after COVID, we're kind of going back up. And so that's the approach that I have, is that we do multiple year scenarios to account for long-term growth and then short-term growth.
And I will also say that more generally, all of our ministry plans are done with the mind toward the fact that our area is continuing to grow. I mean, many of you will have seen the city of Round Rock even released a report weeks ago, sorry. Weeks ago, it feels like years, but it was just weeks ago, that, Round Rock's obviously experienced a huge amount of growth in the last 10, 15, 20 years, but that's not predicted to stop. The city's anticipating that Round Rock's population will go from 130-ish thousand people today to 200,000 by 2040, okay, which is not that far away. And so, that's just Round Rock. That does not account for area growth in Hutto, continued growth in Georgetown, Cedar Park, et cetera, et cetera. And so we are really thinking about, okay, well, how does doing ministry in that environment impact our plans for how we structure things, whether it's ministries, the budget being a big thing, or what have you. So that's definitely on our minds for sure. Now, I do have to say, we have 2 minutes, and then we've got to go get ready for church.
Yeah.
I have to get ready
Duke
for church.
has a question that he's been...
So, yeah, Duke.
The amount of roof space we have we really explored going solar?
We discussed that back in 2018.
Jeff could speak to that probably better than we could, actually.
So when this building was built, we put in some piping conduit, and it's ready to put solar on. When the
Yeah,
If we do a new roof, that's something
we could explore.
And I'll get your question just one second. I'll also tell you that we did really look at it, and back in 2018, like right after we built the parish hall, we really did spend a lot of time. And and I will be honest that I haven't looked at it since then, but when you actually peel back all the layers of these people that are selling you these packages and saying, oh, you'll pay it back in 20 years, it's not true, because the cost of the solar panels and all the equipment, those things only have like a 7-year life. And so, yeah, so they may show you like a fancy graph or something like that. Yeah, yeah.
So you
yeah.
really can speak
You
to
can
that.
speak to
Yes,
it.
that's right.
I say back then, but when we looked at it back then, the payback was not there. I don't know what it looks like now, so just to.
So one thing I'd add, the new Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed, nonprofits really couldn't take advantage of the tax advantages, but the new act makes the 30% federal tax credit refundable now to nonprofits.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay. Interesting.
it makes it 30% cheaper.
Well,
Yeah.
then we're going to have to talk about that. So,
Yeah, we'll look at, yes. More, we'll talk after class.
Yes.
Yeah. That's good.
All right.
Well, in the interest of time.
Yeah, I think
we
Duke did have a
yeah.
question that we need to get.
That was it?
Okay.
Yes, you're correct on the solar, if you pay it out over 20 years, it doesn't work. But if you can get the money aside and pay cash down, my solar pays for itself in 7 years with about a 25-year life expectancy.
Right.
So it's feasible and the green thing to do.
Yeah. So, and like I said, I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm just saying that last time I looked at it a couple of years ago, that's kind of what I saw. And I'm an engineer, and I work as a construction expert, and so I can kind of peel that stuff back. And I've actually had to help like school districts and things that have done these energy saving programs that they come, and they are not what they. I'm not trying to belittle anybody, but sometimes they're not what they are, what they say they are.
Sure.
So, any further question? One last question before we go? Okay, well, I really appreciate y'all's time coming to listen to us. Sometimes numbers can be a little bit boring, but I view this as ministry work and a story, not just numbers on a page. So thanks for your time, y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys.